The last bus out of Enugu that night was already reversing out of the park when a voice called Ekaette Bassey's name from somewhere behind the fuel station, in a voice that had been dead for 6 years. She did not turn. She did not answer. She had been warned 3 hours earlier by a stranger with cracked hands and tired eyes never to do either. And that single choice, made in under 2 seconds, was the only reason she is alive to tell anyone this story today. It began, as these things often do, with an ordinary delay. Ekaette had missed her usual evening transport home to Oron because a delivery of drugs came late to the small clinic where she worked as a nurse. And by the time she locked the dispensary and ran through the wet streets near Holy Ghost Park, the regular buses to the riverine towns had already filled and gone. The park attendants, men who spent their lives shouting destinations into the exhaust-thick air, waved her toward a single bus parked apart from the others, its headlights already lit, its engine already humming low like something breathing in its sleep. "Now the last one, oh," one of the attendants said, not quite looking at her. "If you no enter this one, you go sleep for park." She almost didn't enter it. There was something about the bus that made her pause. An old Nissan Vanette with a faded green body, its paint scratched away in patches like a skin disease, its seats patched with mismatched fabric. The driver sat very still behind the wheel, an elderly man with skin like tanned leather and eyes that did not move to greet her the way drivers usually did, scanning for one more paying head to fill one more seat. He simply waited. She climbed in because her legs were tired, and her mother, her real mother, the woman who had raised her before the river fever took her, used to say that a stubborn child sleeps in the rain. 6 other passengers were already seated, scattered through the bus like reluctant strangers at a wedding they hadn't wanted to attend. There was a heavy-set market woman with a wrapper the color of overripe mango, her basket wedged between her feet, muttering under her breath about traders who owed her money. 2 seats back sat a young man in a police uniform, off-duty, his beret folded neatly on his lap, his jaw tight the way soldiers' jaws get when they are trying very hard not to think about something. Near the rear, a woman rocked a sleeping infant against her chest, humming a lullaby too soft to make out the words. A drunk young man sprawled across the very back seat, his shirt unbuttoned, singing snatches of a high-life song and laughing at nothing. And directly across the aisle from where Ekaette sat down, sat an old man, his face a map of a much longer road than the one they were about to travel, a walking stick resting between his knees, though his back was straight as a soldier's rifle. It was this old man, whose name she would later learn was Yolumo, who leaned toward her as the bus doors folded shut with a groan and said the words that would save her life. "You are new to this road," he said. It was not a question. "First time," she admitted. "I usually take the 6 o'clock. "Then hear me well, small girl, because I will only say it once, the way it was said to me the first time I rode this bus 20 years ago when my hair was still black." He tapped his stick twice against the metal floor, as if calling the bus itself to witness. "This road we are entering, between here and the riverine towns, passes through Iyi-Ocha Forest. On this road, at night, on this particular bus, you will hear things. You may hear a voice call your name. It may sound exactly like someone you love. It may sound exactly like someone you have buried. No matter how real it sounds, no matter how much your body wants to turn toward it, you do not answer. You do not turn your head. You do not open your mouth. You look straight ahead as if you heard nothing at all until this bus crosses the bridge at Iyi-Ocha and the cocks begin to crow on the other side." Ekaette laughed, the nervous laugh of a city-trained nurse who had spent 3 years being taught that fevers came from mosquitoes and not from ancestors. Baba, with respect, I have driven this road with other buses many times. Nothing has ever called me. Because you are never on this bus, Yolumon said simply, and turned to look out the window and said nothing more for a long while, leaving the weight of his warning to settle over her like humidity before rain. The bus pulled out onto the expressway, past the last glowing signboards of the city, past roadside suya stands sending curls of smoke into the dark, past a checkpoint where 2 policemen waved them through without even lifting their torchlight. The market woman continued her mutterings. The drunk man singing grew softer, then stopped altogether, replaced by the heavy breathing of someone who had finally succumbed to palm wine and exhaustion. The off-duty officer stared out his window with a fixed attention of a man watching for an ambush that had not yet arrived. And the driver, I noticed this only now, never once looked into his rearview mirror. Not to check on his passengers, not to check the road behind him. His eyes stayed fixed on the tarmac ahead, unblinking, as if the mirror itself did not exist for him. She wanted to ask, why? She would learn before the night ended that some questions on this bus were more dangerous to ask than others. The city lights fell away completely an hour into the journey, and the forest closed in on both sides of the road like a mouth deciding to swallow. The headlights carved a narrow tunnel of visibility through trees that seemed older than the road itself, their canopies knotted together so thickly that no moonlight reached the tarmac. Even the market woman fell silent now. Even the infant who was fussing softly quieted, as if the child understood something the adults were only beginning to suspect. It was the police officer who broke first. Halfway through the forest stretch, his head snapped toward his window, his whole body going rigid. "Emeke," he said, to no one, to the darkness rushing past the glass. "That's my brother's voice." Yolumon's hand shot across the aisle and gripped the young officer's wrist with a strength that seemed impossible for a man his age. "Look at me," the old man said, low and urgent. "Look at me, not at the window." "He's calling me," the officer whispered, and there was a tremor in his voice that no uniform could hide. "My brother, he died 2 years ago in Sambisa, and that is his voice, Baba. I would know it anywhere. He is calling my name outside this window." "Your brother is dead, and dead men do not call the living from the side of a forest road. Something else is wearing his voice tonight, the way a thief wears another man's shirt to walk unrecognized into his house. Do not answer it. Do not answer it, my son." The officer's chest heaved. Sweat beaded along his hairline despite the cool night air blowing through the cracked window. For nearly a full minute, no one on the bus breathed properly, waiting to see whether a grown man, trained to face armed men in the bush, could resist the pull of a dead brother's voice. Then, slowly, his shoulders dropped. He turned his face forward, toward the driver's seat, toward the tunnel of headlight cutting through the black trees, and he did not look at the window again for a long time. Later, he would tell Ekaette, in a voice scraped hollow, that the hardest thing he had ever done in his life, harder than his first gunfight, harder than identifying his brother's body, was choosing not to answer that voice. The bus rattled onward. The market woman crossed herself, though she was not Catholic, out of the general human instinct to reach for any protection available when the night turned strange. Ekaette found her own hands trembling in her lap, and she pressed them flat against her thighs to still them. "This one is not my first time hearing it call somebody," the market woman muttered, more to her basket than to anyone else, though everyone heard her clearly in that tight, listening silence. 2 years ago, on this same bus, it called my business partner's name, the one who cheated me on a consignment of stockfish and disappeared, owing me 40,000 naira. I nearly begged the driver to slow down so the forest could keep him. A short, brittle laugh escaped her, the kind of laughter that arrives uninvited in the middle of fear because the body needs somewhere to put the pressure. God forgive me for even thinking it, but I tell you, small girl, this road does not only take the innocent, sometimes it offers you exactly what your heart is angry enough to want, just to see if you will reach for it. And did you reach for it? Ekaette asked, unable to stop herself. The market woman's laughter died as quickly as it had come. No, she said, quieter now, all humor gone from her voice, because my mother trained me better than my anger. But I understood that night that this forest does not only need to trick you with love alone. Sometimes it only needs to find the ugliest wish sitting quietly in your chest and hold it up to your face like a mirror and wait. Baba, she said quietly to Yolumon, needing to fill the silence with something else than her own fear. How do you know all this? You said 20 years. The old man was quiet for a long moment, long enough that she thought he would not answer at all. When he finally spoke, his voice had dropped into a register reserved for confessions. 20 years ago, I rode this same bus with my younger sister. Her name does not matter for this story, but I will tell you she had a laugh that could wake a whole compound and a stubbornness that frightened our mother. She was traveling home for her introduction ceremony. She was to be married the following week. I remember she wore a yellow blouse that night because she said yellow made her feel like sunlight even in the dark. He paused, his fingers tightening the head of his walking stick. On this road, in this forest, a voice called her name. It was her mother's voice, her real mother, who was at that very moment asleep in her bed many miles away, waiting for her wedding. My sister turned. My sister answered. She said, "Mama, is that you?" And the moment the words left her mouth, the bus doors, which no one had touched, opened by themselves, and something pulled her out into the trees as fast as by the time I reached the door, there was nothing there. No sound, no struggle, no yellow blouse caught on a branch, nothing. The driver at that time, not this one, an older man, long dead now, told the rest of us that once a person answers, the forest considers it an invitation, and no living hand can undo an invitation once it is spoken. Ekaette's breath caught somewhere in her throat. They never found her. They found her wedding gele, folded neatly on a rock beside the bridge 3 days later. Nothing else, not a bone, not a thread of the yellow blouse, nothing. Ayolomun's eyes, when he finally turned them to her, were wet but unblinking. That is why I still ride this bus, small girl, not because I have anywhere to go at this hour. I ride it because someone on this bus needs to remember the rule loudly enough that the young ones survive it. I have made that my penance for 20 years, that I did not grab her hand fast enough, that I did not warn her the way an old man tonight is warning you. The bus fell into a silence so complete that the engine's rattle seemed thunderous by comparison. Even the drunk man at the back had gone still, and Ekaette, glancing toward him, felt a small chill she couldn't name. His chest did not appear to be rising and falling the way a sleeping man should. She told herself it was the darkness playing tricks, and she looked away and did not look again. Before I tell you what happens in the second half of this journey, because it gets far stranger than a called name in the dark, if this story has already put a chill on the back of your neck, go ahead and subscribe so you don't miss the rest of this one or the Nigerian folktales still coming after it. what happened at the bridge that night changed every single person left on that bus, and not one of them ever spoke of that road the same way again. The bus began to slow, without explanation, somewhere past the halfway mark, the engine coughing and sputtering, the way engines do when something inside them has decided it has traveled far enough. The driver, Bulos, Ekaette had heard the market woman address him by that name in a whisper, as though even his name was something to be spoken carefully, pumped the accelerator twice, and the bus shuddered to a full stop in the middle of the forest road, its headlights illuminating nothing more than more trees, more darkness, more silence pressing in from every side. "No," the market woman said, and it was the first full sentence she had spoken since the officer's brother had called from the window. "No, no, no, we cannot stop here. Everybody knows you do not stop a vehicle in Iyi-Ocha at night." "The engine has stopped itself," Bulu said, and it was the first time he had spoken since Ekaette boarded, his voice a dry rasp like leaves dragged across concrete. "It does this sometimes. It will start again. Everyone stay in your seats. Whatever you hear outside, whatever you see move past these windows, you keep your eyes forward and your mouth shut." As if his words were an invitation of their own kind, the forest outside erupted into sound. Not one voice this time, but many, layered over one another like a market crowd calling out prices. Ekaette's mother's voice again, closer now, pleading, hurt, asking why her daughter would not even look at her after everything. A child's voice that the young mother with the infant recognized instantly, crying out, "Mummy, I'm cold, come and find me," though the baby on her chest had never once left her arms. The drunk singer's own voice somehow calling out from outside the bus as his body remained slumped in the back seat, a detail that made Ekaette's stomach turn to ice when she noticed it. The young mother began to sob, silent, desperate sobs, her whole body curling protectively around the infant, as though the voice outside might reach through the glass and take the child from her arms by force. "That is not my daughter," she kept whispering to herself, rocking, rocking. "That is not her. That is not her voice. My daughter is right here. She is right here with me." It was in this chaos that Ekaette understood, with the clarity that sometimes arrives only in the middle of terror, why the driver never looked in his mirror. Because somewhere behind them, in the black glass of that mirror, something might be looking back that did not belong to any of the 7 living souls seated on that bus. And then her mother's voice called her name again, so close it seemed to come from directly beside her ear, warm breath and all, saying the exact words her mother had said the night before she died of the river fever. "Ekaette, my daughter, come and hold my hand. I am afraid to cross alone." And Ekaette's body turning before her mind had given it permission, her neck twisting toward the window, her lips already parting to say, "Mama, I'm here." Iyi-Olamun's hand caught her chin and forced her face forward with a firmness that left fingerprints on her skin hours afterwards. "She did not need you to hold her hand when she died," the old man said fiercely, his own eyes brimming. "You told me on this bus not 20 minutes ago that you were working at your clinic when they brought word of her passing, and you have carried the guilt of not being there ever since. That thing outside knows your guilt because it has been listening to every word we have spoken tonight. It is not your mother. Your mother forgave you long before she died. Mothers always do. Do not give your life to a voice built out of your own grief." Something in those words, "mothers always do," cracked something open in Ekaette's chest, and instead of turning toward the window, she turned toward Iyi-Olamun and wept openly, the way she had not allowed herself to weep in 6 years of carrying a guilt she had never spoken aloud to a single living person. And as her tears fell, the voices outside the bus seemed to grow angrier, more insistent, more numerous, scratching at the windows like wind that had learned to use fingernails. Then the engine caught. It roared to life without warning, and Bulus threw the bus into gear hard enough that everyone lurched sideways, and the vehicle lunged forward into the dark, tires screaming against wet tarmac, and the voices outside rose into a chorus of fury as the headlights found at last the old iron bridge of Iyi-Ocha, stretching across a river the color of spilled ink. It was on that bridge, with the bus rattling across its metal joints at a speed that should have shaken every bolt loose, that the final and cruelest voice called out. And this time, it did not call Ekaette's name, or the officers, or the young mothers. It called Bulus's name, in a woman's voice, gentle and young, and full of a love that clearly once belonged only to him. Bulus, the voice said, drifting alongside the racing bus as though it had no trouble at all keeping pace. Bulus, why do you keep running from me? I only wanted to grow old with you. Stop the bus, my love, just for a moment, just to say goodbye properly this time. The old driver's hands tightened so hard on the steering wheel that his knuckles went the color of bone, and for one terrible second, his foot lifted from the accelerator and the bus began to slow in the exact middle of the bridge. It was the market woman, silent for so long, forgotten in the corner of everyone's fear, who found her voice first, and it turned out to be a voice of iron. Bulus Chundung, she backed, using his full name the way a mother uses a child's name when she means business. You have driven this bridge for 20 years without stopping once. You will not stop tonight because a ghost wearing your dead wife's voice asked you nicely. Drive! Something in the sound of his own full name, shouted with such fierce authority, seemed to snap Bulus back into himself. His foot slammed down on the accelerator, and the bus surged forward the final stretch of the bridge in a burst of speed that threw everyone against their seats, and the voice of his wife dissolved into a shriek of rage that faded behind them as the trees on the far bank of the river swallowed the sound whole. They crossed into open land on the other side, just as the first grey light of dawn touched the horizon, and somewhere in the distance, faint but unmistakable, a rooster began to crow. The bus did not stop again until it reached the small motor park at the edge of Oron town, and when it finally did, every single passenger sat still for a long moment, as though afraid that standing too quickly might somehow undo the safety they had just crossed into. It was Ayolumon who broke the silence, patting Ekaette's hand once, gently, before rising with the help of his stick. You did well tonight, small girl, better than I did 20 years ago. Baba, she said, her voice still raw from crying. What was that voice? What is it really? The old man considered the question with the weight it deserved. My grandmother called it Mami Iyi, the mother of the river, though she is no true mother to anyone. She takes the shape of whoever will make you turn your head, because your head, once turned, is already halfway hers. Some say she was a woman once, wronged badly enough that her grief curdled into something that now feeds on other people's grief in return. I do not know if that is true. I know only that she has walked that forest longer than any of us have been alive, and that the rule Bulus enforces on this bus is the only shield any of us have ever found. Ekaette turned to find the driver still seated behind his wheel, staring straight ahead even now that the danger had passed, his shoulders trembling in a way that had nothing to do with the cold morning air. She understood without needing to be told that the voice on the bridge had cost him something no rooster's crow could fully repay. Was it true? She asked softly, moving up the aisle to stand beside his seat. Your wife? Bulus did not turn to look at her. She suspected by then that he had trained himself never to turn and look at anyone while driving that road, a habit grief had carved so deeply into him that it no longer knew how to switch itself off even in daylight. 23 years ago, he said, I was courting a woman from a river village on the far side of that bridge. She used to cross it on foot to meet me. against her father's wishes because he did not want his daughter marrying a barren man from the plateau who had wandered south looking for work. One night, she did not arrive. They found her sandals at the edge of the water 2 days later. Nothing else. He finally exhaled a long, shaking breath that seemed to release 2 decades of held air at once. I bought this bus with the little money I had, and I made a vow at the foot of that bridge that as long as I lived, no other traveler would cross it without being warned. That is the only reason this bus still runs the last route out of the city every night. It was never about money. It was never about passengers. It has only ever been about keeping my vow. No one spoke for a while after that. The market woman gathered her basket and pressed a few crumpled naira notes into Bulus's palm as she disembarked, though he tried weakly to refuse them. The young mother kissed the top of her sleeping infant's head and whispered a prayer of thanks before stepping down into the pale morning light. The police officer paused at the door, turned back and simply placed a hand on the old driver's shoulder for a long moment, a gesture that said more than any words could have. And when Ekaette finally reached the back of the bus to check on the drunk singer who had never once stirred through the entire ordeal, she found the seat empty. Not vacated, not slept in and left rumpled, empty, as though no one had ever sat there at all, the fabric cool and undisturbed beneath her palm. She turned, startled, to ask Yolimon if he had seen the man leave, and found the old man watching her with an expression that was not surprise at all, but something closer to sorrow. "He was never truly with us tonight," Yolimon said quietly. "Some say Mami Yi sent her own kind onto the bus sometimes, disguised as ordinary drunk men, to see if the passengers can tell the difference between the living and what only pretends to live. If we had panicked, if any one of us had shaken him awake and demanded he answer for himself, he would have answered. And once one voice on that bus answers, it becomes easier for every other voice outside to be answered too. His silence, strange as it seemed, may have been part of what protected the rest of us." Ekaette finally stepped down from the bus into the golden light of a morning she had genuinely wondered, somewhere around the halfway point of that forest, whether she would ever see again. The town around her was waking slowly. A fisherman untangling his nets by the water. A girl sweeping the dust from her mother's doorstep, the smell of roasting corn drifting from a nearby store. And every ordinary sound of it felt like a gift she had not properly appreciated until that moment. She walked the last stretch to her family's compound on legs that trembled faintly, and when she reached the gate, her father, the only parent left to her now, opened the door before she had even knocked, his face folding into relief at the sight of her. "I thought you would come with the 6 o'clock, he said, pulling her into an embrace. "I was starting to worry, my daughter." She held on to him longer than she normally would have, breathing in the familiar smell of his shirt, of home, of a love that had never once asked her to prove herself worthy of it. "I am here now, Papa," I said, and meant it with my whole chest in a way she had never quite managed before that night. "I am here." She never told her father the full story of what happened on that bus night, not that morning and not for many years afterwards, because some griefs are only properly understood by people who have carried their own down a dark road and lived to reach the other side. But she thought often about the yellow blouse that was never found, and about a young woman with sandals left at the edge of a river, and about an old driver who had turned his own broken heart into a shield strong enough to carry strangers safely across a bridge night after night for 23 years without ever once asking for thanks. She rode that last bus again months later when duty called her back to the city after a visit home, and Bulus was still there, still silent, still refusing to meet anyone's eyes in the mirror. Yolimon was there too, in the same seat, his walking stick resting between his knees, ready to warn whichever frightened new traveler climbed aboard that night. And when a voice, softer this time, almost kind, called Ekaette's name somewhere past the halfway point of the forest, she did not turn her head even a fraction of an inch.
She simply reached across the aisle, the way Iyoliman once had reached for her, and placed her hand over the trembling fingers of the young stranger seated beside her, who had begun, without knowing it, to turn toward the window. They say in that part of the country that grief is the only voice Mami Yi has ever truly owned, because she borrows every other voice from the people who loved you first, and the only defense anyone has ever found against her is to love each other loudly enough in the moment it matters most, that no stolen voice from the dark can ever sound louder than the living hand holding yours. If this story stayed with you the way it stayed with everyone who has ever ridden that last bus out of the city, subscribe for more Nigerian folktales like this one, because somewhere out there another road is waiting, another rule is about to be tested, and another traveler needs to hear it before their name is called.